Now to tonight's guest, Julian Assange, the founder of the WikiLeaks website that this week released to the world more than 90,000 secret US military intelligence documents on the Afghanistan war. We caught up with him earlier this evening in London. Julian Assange, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Tony.
Having immersed yourself in the detail of these documents, what is the key significance of them? What do you believe will be the major impact of releasing them?
Well, I think it will be the vast scale of activities and abuses that are represented here. We're talking about 92,000 reports occurring over a 6-year period from the regular US Army, comprising of nearly every death that has occurred in Afghanistan as a result of US activity or to US forces. So what I see is it's not the big headline things like another Kunduz or Gorani with a big bombing, or those are represented, but rather it is where the most kills are. It's the small events, taking off a child here, or a deaf man there, or running away, or a family or a village that has been shelled in revenge or by accident. That's my big takeaway from this, that it's if you like, not just the bus accidents of war, but all the car accidents, all the pedestrian accidents that actually make up the big kill figures in the end. We're talking about 20,000 people, the stories behind 20,000 kills represented in this material.
You've actually made comparisons between the release of these documents and the opening up of the East German Stasi archives. Of course, the Stasi files revealed repression and criminal activity on a massive scale. You're not alleging anything like that, are you?
There's negligence that's on a massive scale. I wouldn't say that there's criminal activity or deliberate targeting of civilians by US forces on a massive scale, maybe just a few individual events. But we do see the sort of squalor of war coming out on a massive scale, and the destruction of Afghan society. Also, we can see the increase in the war tempo and the number of kill events occurring over time. It's getting worse over at least the last 3 years. And now the general public and academics and journalists have the raw ingredients that the Pentagon was using to monitor and assess the war and come up with its own aggregate figures as to the number of civilian casualties and how the war is heading. And people can see in some cases that the raw ingredients are a bit faulty, so there's some misreporting by ground units, but it also permits people to sort of come up with a different conclusion about how the war is going and how it should go.
You said in your press conference that you and the conventional journalists you'd worked with had only managed to read between 1,000 and 2,000 of the reports properly. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is true. To read them in detail. And that there's just so much material. We maybe had 20 people across the 4 organisations working on this full time, and only for about a month for the other organisations and about 6 weeks for us.
So, how many of the reports that you put on WikiLeaks went onto the site without you actually knowing the detail of what was in them?
It's fair to say that that only 2% have been read in precise detail, and the rest have been hived off using these classification systems. Now, I presume what your question is getting to is how did we split off the 15,000 that we have not yet released because we think they need further review to understand whether there might be innocent informers' names in there. So after reviewing several different sort of types of material, we saw that it was really these threat reports and some other classifications that contained information about informers. So those were all hived off.
Well, not according to the Pentagon. They're accusing you of revealing the identities of Afghan informants and putting their lives at risk. Afghan's President Karzai agrees with that. He says the breach is extremely irresponsible and shocking. Your response to those comments?
Well, we have yet to see clear evidence of that. I mean, The London Times was also making this allegation today, and in a quite disingenuous way. For example, they mentioned some informers' names they say they had found, and with the headline, "Afghan informer already dead." But when you actually read the story, what you see is, in fact, that individual that they're mentioning died 2 years ago. So there's a little bit of media manipulation occurring here. In terms of the Afghan government, it's their interest to sort of play up the irresponsibility of the United States that they say has been involved in sort of collecting and permitting this data to be released. Now, we contacted the White House as a group before we released this material and asked them to help assist in going through it to make sure that no innocent names came out. And the White House did not accept that request.
So you're saying that you offered the White House a chance to go through the documents, or officials from the White House a chance to go through the documents and single out names of people at risk, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Not of course, we did not offer them a chance to veto any material, but rather we told them we were going through a harm minimisation process and offered them the chance to point out names of informers or other innocents who might be harmed. And they did not respond to that request, which was mediated through the New York Times, who was acting as the contact for the 4 media groups involved in this.
Now, I imagine as an Australian, you've paid special attention to material that's related to Australian troops. We've seen relatively few so far and relatively insignificant references, but are there more documents that you know of in the files that have direct implications for Australia's involvement in the war in Afghanistan?
We haven't spent special attention yet on Australia, but you will find that as you go through this material, there's some ways to pick it up. So these Australian troops are located in a particular region of Afghanistan. That is one way of looking for incidences. There's other abbreviations such as Oz and obviously keywords such as Australia. It's worth remembering that these are reports by US forces. Now, they do sometimes overlap with the activities of Australian forces because there can be combined operations or transports, but purely Australian operations will not be included in this material. One of the interesting things that I did see included was a report to the US Embassy in Kabul speaking about the change of Australian-Afghan policy under John Howard. I think it was in 2006. And the embassy in Kabul was made aware of this and what it would be and the upcoming details some weeks before the Australian public was made aware.
I heard your general statement earlier, but is there specific evidence in the documents that you've seen or know the contents of showing that NATO and Allied troops have covered up civilian deaths or suppressed information about the numbers of civilian deaths?
Yes, there's a number of incidences related to that, including the deaths of children. We've seen these are of different types. So there's events in here that have not been reported before. There's also events in here that have been reported before and scrutinised. And we can go back and look what was the original filing and how does that line up with what we've come to know about these events, such as Kunduz or Gorani, these big bombing events. And there's also cases where it has been reported before, although maybe not in the Western press and prosecuted. So an example of that is there's a Polish My Lai in this material. So Polish troops were hit by an IED, and the next day they come to a village that they've somehow blamed the whole village for this event and shelled the village in a revenge attack. Now, to their credit, the Poles did see this themselves, investigated it, and are in the course of a prosecution in in Poland. For the other sorts of events, we can look at something like Task Force 373, which is US secretive special forces assassination squad that is working its way down a hit list called the kill or capture list, the priority effects list is the acronym used by the US military. And there's an example in there of it attacking a house, killing 7 children, 7 others, and taking some captives, not achieving their objective, which was going after Al-Qaeda or Taliban commander, and then covering it up. So we can see in that report a special classification called no foreign, which is no foreign, which means don't even release this report to Australian allied forces.